I'm James Taylor, and you're listening to the SuperCreativity Podcast, a show dedicated to inspiring creative minds like yours. Today's guest is Dr. James Kaufman, a psychologist, author, creativity researcher, and professor of educational psychology at the University of Connecticut. James is known for shaping how we think about creativity, from his 4C model to the Sylvia Plath Effect. His powerful new book, The Creativity Advantage, asks, beyond being creative, what does creativity actually do for us? If you're hungry to understand why creativity matters emotionally, socially, spiritually, you're about to hear why it's not just useful, it's essential. James, welcome to the Super Creativity Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, I know your past research has mapped creativity very widely, from cognition to culture. I'm interested, what has guided this kind of recent work, which is really about why creativity matters rather than just how it works?
It's something I first got interested in with its link to meaning. And my father had been diagnosed with stage 4 bladder cancer, and I kind of had spent the summer with my parents, in essence, to say goodbye, and had been reading things like Man's Search for Meaning. And in the evenings, when I was more in my own time, I began working on this piece on creativity and meaning. And the nice thing is that my father actually recovered. Usually he was given 10% and he ended up beating it. He's still around and cancer free. But my interest in creativity and meaning and kind of the bigger picture of life has continued. And it went from meaning to kind of general positive aspects. So how it helps heal you, how it can connect you to other people, the whole idea of legacy, self-insight, wide variety of different benefits.
Now, the book, you'd redefine creativity across these different dimensions as talked about in the book. Which one surprised you the most? And obviously, I know you from your work. This is a fantastic book that I highly recommend. Anyone that's interested in creativity or theory of creativity, called the Cambridge Handbook of Creativity. I remember reading it a few years ago, and it's an absolute Bible in the world of creativity research. And it really helped shape my own thinking about creativity, the importance of creativity, and how it works. But as you wrote this latest book, has your thinking about creativity shifted? And of those 5 dimensions that you mentioned, which one has maybe changed the most in terms of how you think about it?
I would say a lot of the way my thinking in general has changed has been to focus on the process instead of the outcome or product. So, but not often when you say you're interested in the creative process, people kind of assume, okay, well, how can I be more creative? So how can I think of more ideas? Or how can I make sure I select the best one? And I'm certainly interested in that, but more about the fact that almost all the benefits, it doesn't matter how creative you are. So it's not like this helps people who are super creative and the people who are only kind of so-so don't benefit. Pretty much everybody benefits, whether or not they're incredibly creative or whether or not they're just kind of trying it out. A lot of the stuff I found out more about, but wasn't necessarily shocked. Probably the thing that I knew the least about was the part about self-insight and understanding yourself. And I'd remembered when I was writing the book, like 15 years ago, I'd heard about the writing cure, where if you write on a regular basis, kind of in this expressive, emotional way, that it leads to positive outcomes. But ever since the last 15 years, so much stuff has turned out to not replicate, not really turn out. And when I did my kind of just seeing what's been done, I was pleasantly surprised to find out that it absolutely is still true, and there's been even more work on it. And it's something that I myself try to do, is to, as much as I can, journal, kind of write down my thoughts, because that's something that really does help, and any of us can do, whether it's a blog or a diary. I mean, a lot of times I also do this in my own writing. So the book I'm writing right now, which is I'm maybe three-quarters through, it's kind of a fun book. It's on creativity in the movies, where I'm writing about all this stuff on creativity, but every single example and case study is about a movie. And so they're not just movies about creativity, but how they were illustrating a concept. So I write on a regular basis things that are, both nonfiction, but also a little bit personal. And so not everybody will be writing like a book, but it doesn't matter. All sorts of regular writing helps and is beneficial.
And so that immediately makes me think of, we hear Julia Cameron's The Morning Pages. I know a lot of people have found that very useful in their process as well. You're talking about this idea of movie making, and I guess there's an interesting analogy or link there with when we think about movies. So much of movie making and the creativity is a team effort. It's not an individual. You might have an individual that's had an initial idea for a concept, but if you think about a writer's room, whether it's a Saturday Night Live or a movie, there's lots of people that are involved in making that final thing happen. So I'm interested, like as you're thinking about that, when where where did you start seeing that shift come from, the kind of personal side of creativity to more the collective or the team side of creativity?
I very much think it can be both. So, I mean, just to give my own self as an example, almost all of the work I do is collaborative. So any empirical study is me and usually at least one, if not two or three other people. And a lot of that is that I love the collaborative aspect of research. I love talking around ideas and discussions and kind of brainstorming together, but then also figuring out the problems and the obstacles at the last minute together. Um, and the older I get, the more I only collaborate with people I really like, because life is short. If you're going to spend time with people, you should like them. But, and yet there's also the personal, because I always like having one book that I'm working on that's just me. So I like the mix. So most of my work is collaborative. And certainly, even when I'm writing a solo authored book, I'm drawing on conversations and research with so many other people. And even in this one, um, I'm reaching out to a lot of friends when I talk about their work to get their favorite movie, to kind of keep them in the conversation, so to speak. I guess what I love about creativity is that there's so many different aspects and angles that you'll have some things that are just you, but then an awful lot that are actively collaborative, really almost regardless of the domain.
On the collaboration piece, in terms of your own work, we often hear this idea of creative pairs, two different but
Mhm.
complementary individuals helping support each other's work and stress testing each other's work as well. In your own work as a researcher and a writer, is there a key kind of creative pair, another person that you kind of go to that's like that first? You have a concept, an initial idea, you want to stress test something with. Who is that person for you in your own work?
That's an interesting question. Um, Certainly, if it's just if I have an idea and I'm curious about it, I'll often bounce it off first, usually either my wife or my father. So not necessarily a creativity researcher, even though both have actually collaborated with me. Um, Probably my most regular collaboration right now, although again, I have many, but certainly the one that I'm also enjoying among the most is every Wednesday I have a Zoom with a composer named Dana Rowe, who actually composed one of my very favorite musicals of all time, The Fix, but he's done many other things. And we published a book on lessons in creativity for musical theater characters. And what we're doing right now is we're working on a book called So You Have a Theater Kid, which is advice for people whose kids love theater. And it's a mix of life experience research about creativity. And then we've just been interviewing all these people who are theater professionals, so well-known composers, actors, and so on. And in this case, it's one of those, I don't want to say opposites attract, but I'm the academic, Dana's the creative, and that's been wonderful. Uh, but I also have many, many collaborations with pure creativity researchers where they may have much more similar backgrounds, but we often will not be thinking the same, and we will bandy about and discuss different ideas.
I guess that's what's so fascinating about this field. I mean, creativity is quite a broad term, and it means different things to different people and across cultures and countries as well. You can kind of go in many different directions with the research. Was there a sense, like when you first started getting involved in the work of creativity, was an area of this kind of creativity research pulling you? Felt like it was a stronger pull than perhaps another.
So I wanted to be a creative writer growing up. That was my dream. My major was creative writing, and I added psychology at the last minute. My parents are both psychologists. I went to apply to MFA programs, and I still remember I got one response, like when this is back before the internet made everything right there. But it said, if you can do anything else but this, do that. And it was probably supposed to be encouraging, like, yes, you must love it. But I thought, well, I bet I could do something else. And I kind of just applied almost scattershot to a whole bunch of PhD programs in psychology. I didn't know what I was doing. And I was very lucky. I ended up at Yale with Robert Sternberg. And even though he studied creativity, it never entered my mind that I could do that. So the first 2 years, I was doing just not very good work and figuring out what I wanted. And I remember finally, I was almost debating maybe I shouldn't be a graduate student, maybe this isn't for me. And I thought, well, my passion is creative writing. What if I were to try to study that? And I spent a summer in my parents' basement, almost locked in the basement, just reading this whole stack of books that Sternberg gave me. And that was the first time I ever actually cared about anything that I was really reading. Like psychology was fine, but in the same way that, you know, I like watching baseball, whereas all of a sudden this was relevant and it was very personal to me. And that was a turning point. That was when, this is not just what I can study, but this is what I want to, this is what I care about and I'm curious about. And I finally got it because so many of my classmates would say stuff like, I like just daydreaming about studies I could do. And I thought, oh my God, like I don't. And all of a sudden I got it, which was kind of wonderful.
I guess where these two parts come together, creativity, research, psychology as well, is something I think probably one of the first times I heard your name being discussed was the Sylvia Plath Effect. And I believe you termed this idea as well, and it's interesting. Speaking to a lot of, especially I would say musicians, having conversations, and this idea they might not term it as this, but this idea often comes up in terms of the link between psychology and creativity and the challenges that this come. We had a guest on recently who was talking about he worked in the intelligence services, and he said a third of the people that work in his department within the intelligence services, they're neurodiverse. So they ADHD, they have synesthesia, they have all this kind of thing, and they look at it as this is a great advantage for us to have these people because they think in a different way. So I'd love to know, first of all, the origins of how this kind of the Sylvia Plath effect. First of all, tell us what that is, how you kind of got into your kind of your aha moment, I guess, of like how you kind of came upon this as well. And what have been the ripples? Now you've put many years have gone since you kind of first came out with this concept. What have been the ripples? How have people responded to this idea?
It's kind of funny. In some ways, it would be a very unsatisfying answer. Um, I was in my fourth year of graduate school, and I was at the Strand bookstore in New York, and I saw a big book saying modern creative writers, and it was like an encyclopedia. And I had discovered the work of Dean Simonson, who did what's called historiometric work, where you enter information. And at the time, um, I didn't have any real easy way to collect data. And I thought, well, maybe I'll try that. And I just began entering as much information as I could think of from these little biographies. And then when I went to play with it, I found this little hiccup, which was that female poets were much more likely to show some signs of mental illness than any other type of writer. And I did another study that found that among eminent women, the same thing. So compared to fiction writers or politicians or actresses or artists, it was the poets who were much more likely to show signs of mental illness. And I actually didn't think it was terribly interesting. Like I published it, it was fine. Um, but at my first professor job, they had hired a PR person to try to get their name out there. And the person went through my stuff and he's like, well, this could be interesting. And I told him about it. And 2 weeks later, the New York Times was calling me, and it was very strange. I was glib, which now I would never be. And it kind of took off, and I realized, A, a lot of people didn't, they kind of misinterpreted it, where it was a very specific, not particularly interesting finding, and they took it to mean all creative people have mental illness, which isn't really true. And I guess I also realized it affected people. And sometimes they felt, oh, thank God, but sometimes they were very sad or hurt. And to be honest, that was another reason behind the creativity advantage is that I felt that, yes, I do think that there's probably some type of connection between some types of creativity and mental health, but I don't think it's as simple as they're just linked. I also think that perhaps one reason there's this connection is that creativity has so many amazing properties. It makes you feel better, it enhances your mood, it connects you with people, that if somebody's struggling, they may turn to creativity to make them feel better. And certainly there's no evidence to suggest that creativity makes your mental health worse. Um, so the Sylvia Plath effect has kind of lingered. And it's not that I don't think it's true. It's just, I think it's often misinterpreted. It's overemphasized. And I don't know if it's a terribly good legacy to have, to be honest.
Is
I'm,
it? Yeah, I mean, it's because when I've had discussions with especially artists and musicians, I would say about this, some of them feel very strongly on either side of this topic because some of them feel, well, of course that's the case because we're open more to emotions. We have to invest ourselves emotionally with the work, and that's going to maybe create that as well. And others felt very strongly that no, this is just feeding into a bigger media narrative of this kind of lone creative genius myth of putting something up on a pedestal, and it's painting out the contribution of the people that we were speaking earlier about teams and having people around you. It kind of paints out that picture. So I can completely understand why you're a bit conflicted. I mean, it's part of your research is great, is because it's other people have seen it, but it's often been taken out of context.
yes. And I've come to be closer to the second group of people in terms of, on one hand, I do think that there probably is notably more neurodivergence in people who are creative, but not because necessarily of any deep reason. I just think, I don't know, most people I know who are neurodivergent are just more interested and perhaps open to ideas or willing to entertain kind of weirder thoughts and stuff. I don't think there's anything deep or profound necessarily about it. I don't, and certainly I think if it makes people think that they have to have some type of mental health struggle to be creative, then that would be very bad because you don't, you know. And if anything, I think people who have very severe mental health struggles, that can hurt creativity because it makes it so you may not actually produce things if you're struggling. Um, and
Now,
as you mentioned, sorry, as you mentioned, other people mentioning, that creativity is so nuanced and rich and involving teams and all these different parts that it's hard to paint it with just one brush.
obviously, with the creativity advantage, you've kind of zoomed out and talking about this sense of meaning, which so many people were looking. They want the sense of meaning in the life and the link that creativity has to that. As the book has been, as people have been reading the book now as well, and giving you thoughts on their feelings from the book and their observations of the book, what have been the things you've been hearing multiple times that have affected people, or they found, this is the thing I got the most from reading the book?
The thing that I love hearing the most is people who've decided to try being creative, sometimes with their kids. So not necessarily in response to any particular thing, but more of the general gestalt.
Yeah.
I've also heard from several researchers who've begun wanting to study this. Just positive things in creativity, and that is to me very exciting because I feel like we so often focus on the negative, or even if we don't focus on the negative, we focus on, well, how can we be more creative and focus on this outcome and product, and not, well, why would you want to in the big picture? I mean, creativity is effort. Nowadays we have AI, which is kind of threatening to take over everything. I mean, if AI can do creativity better than we can, and I'm not saying it can, but like, why bother doing it unless you're getting something from the process? So I'm excited to see more work and just more thought and more people trying to be creative based on.
Now, there's the link between AI and so creativity and AI is obviously something I speak about a lot. That's kind of really my how these tools can both augment and actually, and we're seeing more studies coming just now, potentially damage or cause problems with people's ability to be creative in their work, or teams' ability to be creative in their work. As you look around, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, the Cambridge Handbook of Creativity, go and get your copy, but I know you're kind of working on the next version of this book. And as you look out there, in terms of some of the latest research that's being done on creativity and the researchers out there, who's really inspiring you? Whose work has kind of just kind of lit you up in terms of what they're doing?
There is a whole younger generation that I think is just doing amazing work. Everything from people who are assistant or just associate professors to even just some postdocs and graduate students. And what's great is they're all over the world. So, you have Maciek Karwowski, who is not early career, but a lot of his lab, like Ola Zelinsky, who just got her PhD. You have Matthias Benedict, who again, he's not early career, but then his postdocs and graduate students, such as Simon C., they're just doing this work. You got Roger Beatty, again, he's the more senior person, and Simone Lucchini, um, and they're doing some creativity AI stuff. And it's this team of these leaders and then their graduate students who are going to be picking up the torch. And I could name another 30 people, but people who are so much better than I was when I was in my late 20s, people who are better with methods and stats and who are better with just thinking of interesting things and like looking, well, how about YouTube and Twitter and things like that. So many of the people who I get to work with. I mean, some of these people, plus, Hans Kapoor, Krista Taylor, Alex McKay, so many of these people, so many of my former students, Sarah Luria, Molly Hollinger, so many of these folks, and just getting to see them carving new territory. And a lot of it sometimes in the creativity advantage area, but sometimes doing stuff, creativity AI. Uh, it's just, it's exciting. I think we're in really good hands.
It feels also there's quite a strong generational shift that's going on as well. This word creativity, which I mean, I've even noticed as a speaker speaking to, I primarily speak to corporate clients around the world, and even when I started speaking on this topic, 2017, there was you could sense the resistance around creativity as a term in a business context, and so I had to spend a little bit of time at the start just talking about what that is and how it relates to innovation and the benefits and the kind of the ROI, I guess, of the creativity from that perspective. But now with this younger generation that's coming into the workforce, it feels, and I don't know exactly what the data is to support this, but it feels like those younger leaders, those Gen X, those millennials, are much more comfortable in using that term creativity in a business context. And I'm wondering if what you're seeing is a little bit of that going on as well.
Certainly, when I first entered the field as an academic, there weren't very many people studying this. There really weren't. Nobody was looking for a creativity person. When I got my PhD, I sent out 40 job applications and I got nothing. Uh, Luckily, I ended up getting a position at Educational Testing Service. Um, and similarly, I always consult here and there, and there was just a lot less with both education and business. Um, Even if somebody was interested, their superior would often be like, well, who cares? Why do we want this? There's less of that now. There's still sometimes that, but I feel like there's more of a general understanding that yes, a creative workforce is better. And I think some of that is, I mean, you need to be willing to think longer term to see real ROI on creativity. Because if you put a whole bunch of resources into helping train and nurture and support creativity, you probably won't make that back the first year. But over a couple of years, I believe you will see the dividends. It's just most people aren't willing to wait that long, even now. But at least now it's not a dirty word the way it
Yeah.
was 25 years ago.
Now, I know we had a recent guest on the podcast, Professor Joseph Gibelli, who wrote a book called The Brain at Rest, talking about the brain on creativity. So they're basically, he's a neuroscientist talking about how our brain, what we often think, we were talking about, the brain needs to have these periods of rest in order to do creative work. And many of the things in our society are always on. Our hustle culture, our mobile devices that we have with the social media is kind of working against that and is not necessarily as useful for that. So in this world that we're in just now, which of the creative advantages that you talk about in the book do you potentially see as most under siege from this kind of always on culture, and how can we begin to reclaim it?
Good question. Um, so many of the benefits come from the actual process of being creative. Probably the one that comes most to mind is anything involved with healing or improving your mood or your mental health. So much of this stuff, it happens when you are creative. And I mean, it's my worry with AI that if you have an idea for a story and you plug it into ChatGPT, then for a lot of folks, the output may end up being a better story than if they'd written it themselves. But most of us aren't going to be publishing that story anyway, or even if we do, it won't be in the New Yorker. What happens is that if we were to actually write that story or draw that picture, we get these benefits. It puts us in a better mood. It it just it does all of these different things from self-insight to our own feelings of legacy. If we're not engaged in that process, we don't get those benefits. And how do we take that back? I mean, I feel like with AI, the horse is out of the barn. You're not going to be able to change that. I mean, I know a lot of professors have no idea how to deal with AI out there. Not like I have any great wisdom on that. I think to a certain degree, It's just to try to convince people, at the very least, if you're going to use AI, to use it as a collaborator and not as a cheat code. And it's hard because people don't like effort. And I mean, I'm not saying this condescendingly. I don't like effort. I mean, there are many things in my life, if I could press a button and have done, I would do it. And now with AI, we have this, and I understand why people are using it. I mean, I generally don't, but some of that is I really enjoy writing. And so I don't necessarily want to give that up. But it's hard to tell people, don't do this easy thing that is everywhere and will probably end up being a little better than what you would have done by yourself.
Yeah, kind of going back to what you spoke about earlier with Dana talking about how she's your kind of creative peer. That's certainly the way that I think about creativity. I kind of use it as I know what my blind spots are and my weak points from a creative standpoint, and so I tend to use it as a way to help me see those or strengthen those as well. You mentioned the editing, and you're obviously a skilled editor, so for me, having someone like that I can put it into the mind of a great, New Yorker editor or whoever, and just say, pretend you are that person. Now, review this. And what I'm finding interesting about that is making me ask different kind of questions I perhaps wouldn't have asked if I just kind of just gone in a more straight line and just having it on my own. And so the thing I'm quite excited about is for many people that maybe live in parts of the world or don't have a community or those collaborators maybe around them, this is that potential type of collaborator that they can use if they can put in the guardrails. That's one of the challenges.
Certainly, I do see how it could be helpful. I mean, I feel like most creativity researchers either are gung ho excited or a little terrified. And I'm very much in the latter camp, but I respect the people who I know who are gung ho to acknowledge that there absolutely are these possibilities. And the fact that, I mean, it's an interesting question because on one hand, what AI could be for a lot of people who may not have access to other creative types or to just the opportunities, it absolutely could be this thing. On the other hand, if we're thinking, I would feel better if there wasn't already so much capitalism inherent in it, where the
Hmm.
best versions are pay and the versions you can get for free are notably worse. One thing that excites me about creativity is there's tremendous capacity for equity there. Because, if you look at things like intelligence or academic achievement, you find differences by socioeconomic status and other things for a variety of reasons. But creativity, you really don't see them. Almost everybody has the same um, capacity to potentially be creative. And I just worry about that going away. I worry that AI could make us value creativity more because now everybody can work on it, or it could make us value creativity less because we can outsource it. And so, what does it matter if you could do it yourself?
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen,
I'm
but I can
I'm
see the
probably
talk.
I'm guessing maybe I'm in the bit more. I think we'll go through this period where there will be, the hacks and the cheat code versions of these things as well. Where I hope we eventually get to is, and you've done a lot of work in terms of talking about this idea of small C creativity and big C creativity. For me, I feel it just, if it helps the general pop just push forward towards that bigger C creativity that you talk about, that's fantastic. And I just see it from in the sciences, where I look at researchers, scientists that are working on protein folding and things like that, where this is unlocking huge potential for them to discover new drug discovery with antibiotics and other things as well. So I see it there. Where I'm probably a little bit more challenged is when we look at maybe marketing and other fields where there's a slightly different usage that's going on as well. So, but we definitely live in interesting times as well. So
Yes.
if you could, you've got such a breadth and depth of knowledge on creativity. Someone that's listening to this, maybe this is their very first episode they've listened to this show, and they're interested in creativity and unlocking their potential, their creative potential as well. What is one act or ritual or habit that you've seen people do which has had maybe quite a simple thing for them to do, but it's had the most profound impact on enhancing their creativity? Maybe it's kind of going back to some of the things that obviously you talk about in the creativity advantage as well.
The personality trait that's most associated with creativity is openness. And that can be openness to experiences, openness to ideas. And the simplest thing that people can do is just try to do one new thing a week. And I don't mean something new that is shockingly new that will make you terrified, although that would be great. But like, if you have a favorite restaurant, order something you've never ordered. Or if you have a favorite meal that you cook, tweak it a bit. Try finding a new way home from work or school. I mean, maybe not if you're walking, maybe don't get too lost if you're a kid. Um, Try watching something, reading something you haven't done before. Just that pushing yourself a little bit with trying something new, thinking something new, because that's the first step, and that's something everybody can do, no matter where you are. You know
Yeah, my
that
wife,
that's
I think very much along those lines, which frustrates my wife no ends because we'll often be in a restaurant and I'll want to try the one thing on the menu that we haven't tried before. And even though she said, James, that's going to be a terrible decision if you make that decision. We just go for the tried and tested thing. But I said, well, let's go. And she is usually right. I must give her credit for that. But I just feel it's kind of using that part of my brain as well. Um, as we start to finish up here as well, just kind of quick fire questions for you. Is there one quote that you kind of tend to live by, or you find yourself returning to this one quote perhaps more than others?
if I'm honest, the quote that probably comes back to you the most is from a movie called House of Games, which is, "We'll deal with that thing then," and it keeps me from worrying about most
Mm.
things. In terms of, could this bad thing happen? Maybe. We'll deal with that thing then. I have no idea if that's a healthy coping mechanism or not, but it's one that I actually do.
And is there a tool or a habit or a ritual that you find is very important for your own creative work?
I think learning what works best for your headspace based on time of day. So, like, when I wake up, I usually will either do calls or emails, and I find that it's usually around 1 to 4 p.m. when I'm at my most creative. And so I try to time it so that's my time that I can do my writing. If it, to the extent possible, not everybody has the luxury of doing this, but if there's certain times that your brain is just firing on all cylinders and this is when you can be the most creative, try as much as possible to allow yourself that time to be creative as opposed to have that time be when you're stuck in meetings.
And if there was one book you would recommend to our listeners, not one of your own books, but a book by another author, what would that book be?
Oh, that's a good question. Something that's excited me is that a lot of the layperson books on creativity are not by researchers, but recently there have been a number of them. And there's books by Scott Barry Kaufman, books by Zorana Idcevic. There's a book on curiosity and on kind of defying the system by Todd Kashdan. The fact that we're seeing layperson books by people who are actually experts, and any of those, among others. Because when I was first entering the field, there were layperson books by like Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi and Bob Sternberg and Howard Gardner, and they were all legit. And at a certain point, it just got harder and harder for there to be these layperson books by the experts. And now we're coming back to that. And so that would be what I would recommend.
That's great. I mean, I think it's that thing we're seeing in terms of the academics being, relearning storytelling in this form as well, which is, kind of going back to, you're talking about Man's Search for Meaning. I was thinking about Joseph Campbell as well, some of those key things that often kind of come back to us as well. Dr. James Kaufman, thank you so much for being a guest on the SuperCreativity Podcast. You can subscribe to the SuperCreativity Podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast. While you're there, leave us a review. I would really, really appreciate it. I'm James Taylor, and you've been listening to the SuperCreativity Podcast.